see you all. So if we go through the agenda, attendances, do we have any absence?
We have apologies from Councillor Lamb, Councillor Shaw, Councillor White, Councillor Denise Weston, and then Councillor Weston and Councillor Wright, and the statutory scrutiny officer as well.
Right, thanks for that. Good evening, Karen. No, you're all right, don't worry. Only just started. So the next item is item 2, minutes of the previous meeting. Can we agree those as a correct record? Yeah. Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. Rose.
I might have a declaration of interest. One of my jobs is working for Trafford Parents Forum, and under the Trafford Housing Trust agenda item, we currently have a funding bid submitted to them, so I just want to declare that now.
That's fine, thanks for that. Item 4 is questions from the public, and as far as I know, we don't have any.
None have been received.
Thank you. Item 5 is Trafford Housing Trust Social Investment Fund. There is somebody to come along from Trafford Housing Trust to do a presentation for us, but she's stuck in traffic. So we'll leave that item until a bit later, until she arrives. Okay. So item 6 is a budget presentation, so we'll deal with that first.
Right, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for inviting Nikki and I down this evening for your scrutiny meeting. I'm going to go through this presentation, and if I could ask for questions at the end, if that's okay. I'll try not to take too much of your time with the presentation, so there's a discussion afterwards. So, if we go to the first slide. Thank you. We just thought it would be a good idea to show you what our current controllable budget is by each directorate. I mean, what I'd point out in there is the significant spend that we have in children's and adult services. Obviously, that makes up over 50% of our controllable budgets each year, and that's pretty similar year on year. Very much demand-led, and obviously something that you may have seen in revenue budget monitoring reports that we keep a close eye on as the months of a budget year progress. You'll see that there's other things in there as well. So council-wide budgets, the place. So Richard Rowe, our corporate director, that's many of the things that are under his portfolio. If we go on to the next one. And this is the funding. So you'll see the majority of our funding comes from council tax. And after that, we've got business rates, and then there's some the business rates growth. So it's all there. What I would like to do, the reason why we've got this in here is to show you that we no longer receive a grant from government. So 10 years ago, we would be receiving a grant. And what's happened over the last 10 years is the size of that grant has fallen, and now we don't get anything. So our income or budget funding comes from business rates, council tax, investment income, primarily. Okay. And we just thought this would be useful to see. Some of you have seen this already. This is year on year since the austerity measures kicked in 2010, 2011. You will see the amount that we've had to save from the budget year on year. Here, I'd like to draw your attention to the diminishing blue columns there, which represent efficiency and policy choice. That is becoming something that is increasingly difficult to achieve because we run a much smaller council compared with what we did at the start of the austerity measures. You'll also see that we are getting more in terms of, well, we're kind of reliant more on income and funding and reserves to cover the gaps. We've not yet identified how we meet the gaps for 21, 22, but obviously we're currently consulting on our budget for 2020, 21. Okay. Oh, Well, wow. And we nicely segue into the understanding the budget gap. So you'll see that we have pressures. We always have pressures year on year. So pay increases. We add the living wage into that. The demographics. So I know the term isn't popular, but the population, the older population, so the more of the need that we have with an older population. Other kind of pressures that increase costs on the council. To counter that, we look at additional income. So there's some income from grants there at the bottom, which means a net budget gap before we start looking at ways that we address the gap. For this year, it is 12.96 million. Okay. And these are the assumptions that we make when looking at our budget. So these assumptions include pay inflation, general inflation, any increase in levies that we will be obliged to pay, increases on demographic pressures. So they are all listed in the key budget assumptions, which you'll have seen in the agenda item presentation. Other assumptions there, so I'll draw your attention to the 2% increase in the adult social care precept, the 1.99% increase in the council tax rate. So these are things that we assume will factor in to the budget planning for this year and also the next 2 years after that. Okay. Other key assumptions that we've just left out there at the moment, the fair funding review, which has been deferred this year. And that's something which we're looking at all the funding for local authorities. The business rate reset, and I'll just show you the potential loss that we have to deal with when that reset comes. So at the moment, we're estimating that is a potential loss of funding for 13.2 million. However, we aren't looking at that this year because that has been deferred. So there are things that are on the horizon for not this particular budget, but the next couple after this. Okay. In terms of the current budget that we're consulting on, it's unlikely that we will require public consultation, but there may be individual needs, and depending on things that are impacted on. But at the moment, it doesn't look like we will do. May have discussions with providers, friends of park groups. Yeah, and that's all I'll say on that particular slide as it stands. Okay, and here is the start of a list of savings that we've identified that amount to 6.8, nearly 7 million. So you'll see, this is this year's saving, apologies, so yes, sorry. So you'll see the savings that we've made already. So you'll have, you've got the two big ones there, that the Manchester Airport Group dividend. We receive that every year. The asset investment strategy. So those of you that may be familiar, we've got a strategy with regards to our investment, which is managed by our investment board, which is cross-party. That is a way of generating income for us, which you can see in this current year, it's over 1.2 million. There's various other savings that are smaller than that are listed in this particular year. And also in this slide as well. So you'll see that there's the number of savings there, including debt restructure, which was the restructure of a loan to make it cheaper. We were paying a loan at a lower rate than we were thanks to a restructuring exercise that was done via our Treasury management team, which was obviously reported at the last council as part of the annual report. Okay. And talking about investment portfolio, this is our current portfolio, which has had recent additions of the town centres, so Stretford Mall and also Stamford Quarter in Altrincham, and also the CIS Tower, which is the other one that's come in recently, which will start giving us a return, and we can use that return to help support the revenue budget. Okay, so the draft budget proposals. So, in terms of meeting the current gap, we have looked at the adult social care precept, as I've mentioned, and also the the increase in council tax. We're looking at a reserve support of 600,000, so that will come from our budget reserves to help fill that gap. This year's policy choice funding savings is, well, funding is 6.5 million, and the savings and income proposals of 7.6 million. On this slide, it leaves a gap that we have to meet between now and the February setting of the budget of 720,000. However, I should say that that has gone up because the government increased the rate of interest for the Public Works Loan Board. It's made returns less. Well, we're going to get fewer amounts in our returns, and the interest rate is more expensive. So that has meant that our gap is now approximately 800,000. So it's gone up about £100,000 because of that decision. Okay. So in terms of the 7.65 million, a lot of that will come from our commercial activity. So that is around the investment side. We're looking at some reshaping work in the adult social care services. Other efficiencies at the top there of a million that we're currently working on to deliver to help close that gap. Okay. And these are the current savings and income, that we're looking to generate to help bridge that gap. Again, you'll see that there's a significant amount for the investment income in there. There's other lines in there that will help bring in some additional savings that will help bridge the gap that we've got. And that's just a continuation of those proposals there, which were all in your presentation that was circulated, which is this. Okay. So, and other things that we've got to consider. Obviously, I've just said about the interest rate increase that's had an adverse effect on the budget gap. The modernisation programme that the council has started, so we may begin to see the benefits of that programme in the next budget year in particular, but it's a work in progress. We've started having sit down and sessions with our colleagues across the council. We also need to have a look at how robust our social care budgets are. It's demand led, and as I say, we need to make sure that we're funding them correctly. So that might have an impact on the remaining gap if we were required to put some more into the budgets for especially adults and children's social care. And that is the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, Barry first.
Thank you, Chair. I'm new to the council, as you know, and I'm trying to get an idea of the consequence of the lack of central government grant on the council. So approximately how much did we used to get from central government? That's quite a difficult question. It goes back to...
I will let Nikki answer the figure, and then I'll give a commentary on the actual makeup of the budget.
Oh, thank you.
So I'm sorry, I'm going to disappoint because I don't know the figure off the top of my head. But gradually over the last few years, the amount of grant we were getting was declining, so it was very, very small. It would have been very small in this, which is the 4th year of our settlement. When we went into when we went into the 100% business rates retention pilot in Greater Manchester, then the business rates contribution replaced what was left of our grant. So the grant just disappeared at that point, which was 3 years ago now, I think.
What I would say from my perspective is the when I started on the council, the makeup of the budget was very different to as it is now. One of the consequences of the revenue we get now and where we're reliant on is, I feel, we're more exposed to, say, economic shocks. So, for instance, if we had a recession, that could hit our business rates return and collection from that. It could hit our investment return. It could hit the amount of council tax we get back. So we're more exposed than we used to be to the economic climate out there. So when things are going well, we obviously benefit from economic growth and the people paying council tax, people new homes and all that kind of thing. But when there are things like the risk of recession or a downturn, then we are more exposed as a council, and that'll be the same across other councils as well. It's been a big change in the way that councils are supported in terms of funding.
Sorry, if I can just come back in on that. I think an example of what Councillor Ross has just been talking about can be seen in both this year's and last year's budget monitoring reports as we've gone through the year. So this year we had a number of large properties that were taken off the business rates list because they're actually being refurbished or they're being knocked down and some other thing is being developed. But that has caused an unexpected shock to our funding. So we've actually had a shortfall in funding this year that we've had to plug from a reserve that we keep for that particular purpose, actually. It's a business rates risk reserve effectively. And the previous year we had a shock when we got a whole load of appeals in to do with the tram line going into, so we got appeals from Trafford Park and the Trafford Centre, and we had to put a provision in for those appeals in the year, and that also affected our funding in that year. So it is, you can win or you can lose. It is much more volatile than the old sort of certainty of a grant system.
Yeah, and that's exactly what strikes me, is that we are by decisions made by central government who are being forced to make some very short-term decisions as opposed to being able to plan. And my background certainly comes from industry, and industry does not work like that. You're able to plan several years out, 5-10 years out. It just feels like we're being put in a kind of no-win game by the way that the central government grant has been removed. It also strikes me as a slightly strange decision to put the interest rates up on the money that we're allowed to borrow. Again, from my perspective, a bizarre decision taken by central government, particularly as interest rates are at the lowest they've ever been. It just seems like another great difficulty we are having to cope with, having to thrust that back onto the council taxpayers in Trafford. Okay, I've finished. Thank you, Chair.
I think what you're saying is probably right, but having said that, the grant was, you couldn't assume from one year to the next what the grant was going to be, so there was uncertainty in relation to that, because it could be cut or they could be increased. So it wasn't absolute, certainty. Can I just follow on from that? Because obviously the fair funding and business rate reset has been deferred again for another year. But there's a kind of assumption around the reset that there's a potential loss of £13 million next year. How do you calculate that? Is there a formula that is calculated? And whilst I'm at it, the business rates growth, I'm assuming that we are allowed to keep all of that at this moment in time, but that potentially will change next year.
Yes. So if you look at this slide, you can see that there's about 11.5 million of business rates growth, and then there's some other small bits of business rates monies, as well as the business rates baseline funding. When the reset comes, we will lose that growth. So we've had the benefit of that growth. We have to make some assumptions around what will happen in terms of, because the whole point of the business rates reset is that it ties in with the fair funding review. They reset the business rates, they take all the growth back into the centre, and then they redistribute it as part of the fair funding. So it gives them something to redistribute as part of the fair funding. We know that we will lose that growth. What we don't know is what we will get back as our share of it under the fair funding regime. And obviously the increasing delays have meant that we are in a very, very uncertain period that we haven't really, well, I've never experienced anything like it in my time in local government. So, but yes, that's how we calculate it. It is basically just saying this is what all the benefits we've got from the growth, and this is them disappearing.
I assume it'd be unlikely that we would lose all of it. But, you know, yes, we do initially, and then they divvy it up through some kind of formula. But we just don't know what that would be. But I think it seems to me that it's clear that we will have some reduction, you know, that will be taken out of that slice. Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that Trafford has benefited because of our business rates base. We have benefited more than most from being able to retain growth. That does mean that we'll probably suffer more than most in losing that growth when the reset comes as well.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, it's Aidan first.
Thank you, Chair. I have sort of 4 questions that I'm just going to cycle through essentially, and hope you can answer them. The first one is just to clarify for me the process of continuing budget challenges, because you've talked about how the biggest challenge has been the removal of the revenue support grant from central government, and you've explained that grant disappeared, you know, some time ago now, and yet the projections moving forward, we're still seeing cuts all the way through to the 2022-23 fiscal year. And I'm just wondering, given that the money's been gone for so long, can you explain why there's still that pressure and the budget's still reducing, just so I can clarify my own thinking? Thank you.
Okay, part of that, and I'll let Nikki add anything that I miss, is the demographic pressure. So in terms of, we're a very lean council. You know, if you compare us with other councils, which, I mean, they are all struggling, but we exist on a very lean kind of budget, but we still face demographic pressures. So for instance, the proportion of the population that's getting older, the needs that we would have to provide for, which of course we should provide for to make sure that people are cared for and get the right support. So that adds in pressures on our budget. There'll be other things like inflation, wage growth. All those are costs that mean that year on year, you know, we've still got that gap that we have to identify. Obviously, the big thing that we just talked about was the business rates that, you know, that will impact on. That's why we've gone from like about 800,000 this time to millions, about 9 million, I think we're looking at for the following year. But yeah, it is demographics plays a big part in rising costs.
So in essence, sort of the demand pressure and also the business rate reset, is that what we're saying now?
Yes, in that there's all kinds of things going one way or the other way, but yeah, basically, I mean, for example, if you look at the current revenue budget monitoring report, you'll see that our demand pressures are exceeding the budget, and there's an explanation as to why in there. At the same time, we've lost income from business rates this year, as Nikki alluded to. So things cross across, you know, some things go one way, other things go another way. But a lot of our cost is demographics and demand pressures that we've projected for the next few years as part of our medium-term financial plan.
Okay, Bill. The second one I had was that housing benefit overpayment recovery figure of 0.4 million. I was at the this equivalent budget meeting last year, and it sounds remarkably similar to last year's figure. Have I got that wrong? Or because I felt like there was quite a big figure last year as well.
Yeah, so the housing benefit overpayment recovery, the way it works is that we don't pay housing benefits. We award housing benefits, and we get the money from government to pay the housing benefits. So there's no actual effect on us of paying the housing benefits. If people don't report changes in circumstances, that kind of thing, then they end up getting overpaid. Because it's not our money, I think this is where the logic came from originally. Central government give us a reward for collecting overpayments and paying them back to them. And so our level of housing benefits, whilst it's declining because of the introduction of universal credit, it is there is a sort of a group of people that will continue to get housing benefit, that won't move on to universal credit. And so we're sort of, this is our estimate of what we will be able to get in reward grant effectively.
Then I did also just want to ask for some clarification around the digital transformation of services, because I'm not that familiar with the work that's been undertaken there, and it occurred to me that there's going to be costs associated with that. If if there could be the question of redundancies or job losses if services are radically transformed, but also it seems to me that there's going to be a question of digital infrastructure upgrade. And I was just wondering when we might be able to get more information about how far along that work is and what costs we think there are, and when we'll start to have a clearer picture of what's going on with it, really.
So some of those costs, some of the digital transformation work costs would be in the capital programme, which we haven't yet finalised. That's sort of the last bit of the jigsaw, if you like. But some are actually revenue costs as well. So, for example, moving to the Windows 365 is actually a revenue cost because it's sort of ongoing licensing costs. That is built in within the budget. We have built in within this draft budget as well some extra money for transformation, for the transformation team and for the digital team that will be needed to do some of that work. So we've kind of built in some of that stuff into the pressures in the budget, if you like, to start off with, to make, because obviously, as you say, you can't transform something without people and equipment to do it with.
My last one's completely unrelated again. I just wanted to ask for a sort of an overview of where you think the reserves are up to, because I know that some of the spend that you talked about was coming from reserves. And I know previously, Nikki, you've talked to us about sort of when you started at Trafford, a concern that our reserves are really quite low, and they remain quite low relative to other GM local authorities. So I was just wondering if you could give us sort of a status update, really, of how healthy you think the reserves are.
Okay, well, yes, it is still the case that our reserves are low compared with other local authorities. What I would say is that our management of the reserves is, I'd say, prudent, and we do realise that once it's gone, it's gone. So we don't want to rely on reserves. We want to rely on reserves as little as possible. You'll note that about 600,000 we're planning to come from the budget smoothing reserve this year to support the budget gap. We also made a decision at the exec in October when we presented the budget papers to be more transparent with the number of reserves we have, and that information is available in the next budget monitoring report, which will come up for the end of this month. Overall, we obviously have a number of reserves. So we have the business rate smoothing reserve, for instance. That's helped us in year this year to look at some issues that have come up, but we've also got actions to take from funding to put back into that reserve. So we've had to draw on it, but we also have some money that is coming in that we'll be using to replenish it somewhat. So they are tight, but we are, I should say, the team are managing the reserves that we've got very well. And we do live by that maxim. Once the reserves are gone, they're gone. So they are a last resort.
Before I bring Julian in, can I just carry on that theme? Because obviously the reserves table is not in the report, and I think it'd be useful to have that at probably the next meeting, so that we can have a look in detail of all the different reserves that we do have. And I know that we had questions last year around earmark reserves and so on, and it might be useful to look at how things have progressed from last year in terms of that.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it is something that we could have brought specifically to this. If I say to members though that at the in the executive papers from the 14th of October, we do. We do have a list of the details of reserves by category, and we've also got the section 5 of that particular paper on the budget has got the robustness and the risk and reserves information in there as well. So if I could direct you to the executive paper for the budget dated the 14th of October, within the body of that is some further information on the reserves. And yeah, in terms of next year, we will, I'm sure, be happy to bring the reserves to this scrutiny committee as well.
I mean, we do have 2 other meetings, so I think one of those meetings we could receive those, and I accept that we could, trawl through, but not everybody is on the executive for one thing, and we've got all the other information, but we don't have the reserves. So I think it's just for our sake, really, that we believe that we should do that, and we can have a discussion on that in the next.
Yeah, I'd say point taken, and I'm sure that the officers will circulate the relevant information in time for the sessions next month.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Tom.
So very briefly, the 305 million of the investment portfolio, that's on a fixed interest rate for 50 years, is it? I mean, did we just get caught by one deal when the interest rates went up, or are we on a variable 50-year loan?
No, we're not on a variable 50-year loan. They are fixed interest rates.
Fixed.
They increased the interest rate 2 days before Stretford Mall and the other town centres completed. So I had the email at 8 o'clock in the morning when I knew that I was borrowing 50 million 2 days later. So it was quite horrid.
Just on the 2 deals. Unlucky, but thank you. That's it.
Just on that, on the investment, clearly that is becoming a good funding stream, and it's how that will develop into the future, really. And I don't know how much you can work into the future, but it'd be useful just to have, your take on how it is developing.
Thank you. Well, certainly it has become an increasingly important part of our budget revenue. As you'll be aware, that there is the Investment Strategy Board, who are a combination of cross-party representation. So we've got a Green Party member, two Conservative members, and the leader, Councillor Wright, and myself on there. I should say that when I first joined it, I did ask for more information about how decisions are taken and how robust it all is, given my own cautious attitude to investments going up as well as down. We did receive reassurances in the presentation about all the things that are kind of filtered out before they come to members and other people for discussion and agreement. So a lot of work goes into making sure that we have robust investments. We are conscious that this is public money. And another thing that we do aim to do with it is, as a case in point would be in my own backyard, Stretford Mall, is we look to use it for regeneration purposes as well. So there is scope for more. We've got the capital, part of the capital budget is set aside for that strategy. There's scope to identifying what would be robust investments for us. I keep using the word robust. I appreciate that, but I just want to stress how importantly we take it, and we don't take decisions lightly on each of the things that comes before us.
I mean, as it develops, maybe it is a piece of work that Scrutiny could look at in terms of that development of the investment funding and how the safeguards are provided and all of those kind of issues. I recognise that there is a committee that is overseeing it, but there may be, a need for us as a scrutiny body of the council to actually oversee that work of that committee, really, and maybe, just an insight in terms of that would be quite useful into the future. So
again, I think that's a very good idea. I think there is a role for scrutiny, given what we've said about how it is beginning to support the revenue budget and obviously the regeneration consequences of that. So I would welcome that, and I'm sure, I would say, the presentation that I received on that board, I'm sure that is transferable to the scrutiny committee. The more councillors that are confident with the finances, I'd say the better, because that means we all make a much better collective decision.
Thank you, Chair. 3 points that are troubling my little brain at the moment. I know it's a small amount of about 85,000 on car parking. Does that allow for changes in behaviour as a result of increasing the charges? And does it account for or allow for the loss of a lot of revenue earning spaces in the centre of Altrincham? Now, I've got a couple of others, but if you'd like to cover that one first.
I will bring Nicky in, but it's my impression that we're not increasing parking charges, but I will just defer to Nicky.
You have already.
Yes. So the proposals in this budget, and I think the figure that's attached to car parking is...
It was a previous slide.
Oh, this, hang on, where are we? So I think the figure is about 100. There it is, 144. That is actually increased from enforcement activities. So it's increasing penalties for bad parking rather than increasing car parking charges. So there is nothing in next year's budget proposals for increasing car parking charges.
Thank you for that, Nicky. The other two, and we talked about it in the last question, I think, about some investment decisions. I have a cold feeling about the council investing in the oldest tower block in Manchester in the form of the CIS Tower. When I first moved up here from the Midlands, that was the only high-rise building in Manchester to speak of. Are we confident, really confident, that we're not going to be hit by large amounts of refurbishment costs on that relatively old building? And the other is the investments in 2 retail outlets with a high dependence on income from those, when every single time a large chain or a small store is on the point of folding, the first thing they do is come to the landlords, which in this case will be us, and negotiate reduced rents. Give me a warm feeling, please.
So starting with the CIS Tower, we haven't bought the CIS Tower. Or what we have done is lent some money to a developer who is actually refurbishing the CIS towers. So it's part of the regeneration of that area of Greater Manchester. Our return is on that loan to the organisation that are actually doing the refurbishment. So, and I have been to look around that tower, and it's an amazing building, but that's the whole point, is that they are refurbishing it. Yeah. So that's that one. The other one, I've gone back to this slide because what you'll see on there is that next to Stretford Mall and Stamford Quarter, And where is it? The can't find them. We're looking next to those two shopping centres. We haven't actually included any income, any assumed income from them. And if we get an issue, what we're assuming is that the income we get will be enough to cover our loan costs effectively. We aren't assuming anything over and above that because we know there's a lot of work to do with regards to those. So we've been pretty prudent in what we've actually assumed in the budget. So if we do get a return bigger than that, then that's a bonus.
Thank you.
Okay, I have to say,
One last
sorry,
one, if I can just interrupt for Sale Magistrates Court is on there. Got some bad news for you. Somebody's stolen it. That's now just a site. Does that figure there represent what we think we might be able to generate from it? Or what we had to pay to actually acquire it from, I assume, the CPS or someone like that?
Yeah, so that figure is what we paid to acquire it from. I think it might have been Crown Commercial or something like that. And yes, we did knock it down pretty swiftish because otherwise we would have had to pay business rates on it, because we do pay our own business rates. But they are now looking at what to develop on that site, which will hopefully give us a greater capital return than what we paid for it.
I should say, I mean, in terms of, for instance, Stretford Mall, obviously one of the reasons we did that was looking at regeneration. So I appreciate what you say, John, about the retail sector. And I think we've all seen that, it's had a bit of a torrid time nationally and locally over the past 10 years as habits change. But we're at the start of a conversation in Stretford with what we want to see from our town centre of the future. We started with some sessions on Monday about that, which will continue into the new year and beyond. So with that, I am confident we will see a return, but we just got to get together what the view of the public is in, say, Stretford in the first instance, to see what they want to see from it, and then we will build it from there, or not, as the case may be. We'll just see what the consultation is. But so regeneration, I'm confident that will make a thriving town centre for Stretford in the longer term. But it just means in the shorter term we can't expect any income from the site we have. Any income that we do get is a bonus.
Yeah, can I just mention that we have some history in terms of that as well, in terms of Urmston Town Centre, which we bought the precinct and then developed it with developers who did give a handsome return for the real sale. So you can, in terms of investing, to actually save in the future and to be able to develop. If you don't make those moves when you get the opportunity, you will potentially lose out. And I think, particularly Stretford, it's crying out for some kind of redevelopment, and this is a grand opportunity to do that. So what I'm saying is that there is a good example of how that works. Okay, everybody had the questions? Well, can I thank you both very much for the presentation and the answering of the questions. The committee will be looking further and deeper into the budget, particularly around social care and so on, and of course the reserves as well. So thanks very much for coming along. Right, can we now move back to item 5, and we do have Faye Jackson with us from THT, who got stuck in traffic, I believe. Yes, there was an accident, wasn't there? I think. Oh, crikey. Yeah, a nightmare. So the item is item 5, Trafford Housing Trust Social Investment Fund. And Faye, I think you're going to do as a presentation. We've got the reports in front of us as well.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I'll read through some of the report. I won't go into all the sections unless you wish me to. But the report provides an update on the performance to date of the Trafford Housing Trust Social Investment Fund, which forms part of our partnership agreement with Trafford Council. So the Social Investment Fund was launched in September 2017 following a detailed review and consultation with stakeholders about how we could maximise the impact of our commitment to investing in Trafford communities. Within the report, I've detailed an executive summary. I've given you the financial performance to date. And gone into some detail around the applications that we've received, some of the key trends, our commitment to youth provision, and some of the funding outcomes that we're starting to see based on completed projects and the monitoring and evaluation that we've received, and also the capacity building activity, which forms part of our investment in Trafford, and then our forward plans. So if I just focus on the executive summary and the financial performance in our forward plans, and then if you've got any additional questions about the other detail, I'll gladly answer those. So to date, the first thing is that there's actually an error on the first page. So to date, we've invested 1.7 million across 192 projects, and we've invested an additional 308,000 in strengthening the VCSE sector through capacity building. Management costs form part of that as well. As a percentage of our total spend, that's reduced significantly over the first 3 financial years. That's mainly because we've been scaling up the investment and also sort of scaling down the management. So we had to pump prime some of the management costs in terms of setup of our system. So the trend suggests that overall, we've committed to having a cap on management costs of 10%, and that's achievable over the whole fund. So overall, applications have increased in value over the 2 years as we've scaled up. Local organisations have got more ambitious about what they want us to fund. We have 4 priority themes that we invest in. So that's strengthening families and communities, employment and skills, boosting household incomes, and long-term economic growth. The latter 2 themes, so boosting household incomes and also long-term economic growth, consistently attract a lower percentage of applications, and I think that's around the complexities of those subjects. So we are being more proactive around how we can encourage investment opportunities around those areas. In terms of the key trends, we've also noticed that there's potentially a disproportionately low level of spend in the west of Trafford compared to the multiple indices of deprivation, and a relatively high level of spend in the south of Trafford. So again, that's something that we're proactively doing to work with the communities, particularly in the west, to encourage more applications and to seek investment opportunities in those areas. We committed to investing at least 50,000 in youth-related projects per year, and to date we've invested in 68 projects targeting young people in Trafford, which totals 888,000. So we're well above our commitment to young people. More information can be found about all our investment projects on our website, and we also publish everything on GrantNav, which is a national website which is open data and compares us to other investors such as the National Lottery and Co-op Fund. So in terms of the financial performance, as I said, over the last 2 years we've been scaling up our investment work. We've approximately doubled our previous annual investments through the old model of the community panels. So this demonstrates substantial growth. And this financial year, we're forecasting to invest 1.8 million. So our target is 2 million per year, but we had that 3-year scale up period. So as I said, the management costs are coming down. Currently, we're averaging at 11% of the investment spend, but it was disproportionately high in year one due to the additional setup costs and lower investment costs while we scaled up. So it was approximately 31% in year one, 10.8% in year two, and this year just under 7%. So we are bringing that down. In terms of our future plans, I know one of the things that you're interested in is our new relationship with L&Q. So you should be aware that in April this year, we announced that we were in talks with L&Q. And as of the 2nd of October this year, we've become wholly owned by L&Q. So Trafford Housing Trust is now a subsidiary of L&Q, which is London and Quadrant Housing. So the acquisition builds on a highly successful joint venture and partnership that we have had over a number of years now. And we've got a huge commitment to building new homes across the Northwest and improving the standard of the existing stock that we've got, and also creating a Northwest Foundation and an academy to invest in local communities to help those most vulnerable in society. And we've been able to do that through this acquisition by L&Q. The commitment to Trafford and for our 10 million over 10 years between 2017 and 2027 remains the same. The acquisition doesn't change that at all. We've got no plans to change the delivery mechanism for the investment, so it will still be through grants, commissioning, loans and capacity building. The current function, so the team that I manage, the social investment team, will become part of the Northwest Foundation once it's launched next year. So in addition to our commitment to Trafford, we will also be investing additional resources into the other areas across the Northwest where we're going to be developing and building stock. So it's envisaged that around 4 million a year will be invested into communities through the Northwest Foundation, but within that will be our commitment to Trafford. So are there any questions anyone's got?
Okay. Right, Aidan first.
Hi, thanks first of all for coming in. Sorry you had a little bit of a wait. I have just sort of some questions just for clarification and then a few observations, if that's all right. I know you talked about paragraph 4.5 saying that there was a sort of geographical split, and you've picked up yourself on the fact that there's a disproportionate number of applications from the south of the borough. When you refer to West area, can you just explain where West actually covers for us?
So Partington, Urmston, Carrington, Flixton.
Yeah, so I'm being a bit parochial here. My ward that I represent is Bucklow St Martin's, so that would include Partington, Carrington, and then a bit of where your properties fall under the sort of Devon estate in Sale West. So I really just wanted to ask why you think there's it, because Bucklow St Martin's competes really with Clifford Ward in Old Trafford to be the ward that has the highest proportion of incidences of multiple deprivation. So I just wondered if you had any observations as to why the applications received from those areas are so much lower proportionate to sort of the south of the borough, which traditionally we accept as having sort of the wealthier neighbourhoods in Trafford.
So I think it's about how proactive those neighbourhoods are. I also, with our data, we do our best to see where that investment has gone, but it's generally based on where the organisation is based and then where they've told us they're going to be working. So sometimes that's about organisations being based in different parts of the boroughs, but I think it's mainly around how proactive those organisations are and the infrastructure there in terms of the groups. So we are being very proactive in those areas and taking a bit more of a community development approach. So we're reaching out to existing community groups and community assets and buildings in particular, and looking at how we can help them grow and develop the work that they're doing.
That sort of what I wanted to hear, because I had a suspicion that my sort of thinking on is that actually the delivery method, so the delivery method wherein organisations bid for grant funding, I think sometimes in the most deprived communities, you're not going to have as many sort of established community groups that are perhaps as used to and as effective at navigating that delivery method. And I know recently in Partington, we've been trying to fundraise for sort of Christmas activities. And I remember when one of the community groups did approach THT, the application process itself struck me as being really quite arduous. You know, the application form was quite long. So I suppose that's just an observation, and I'm glad to hear that you recognise that in those parts of the borough, perhaps there's some work that can be done to proactively approach community groups and guide them through that process. And the reason I sort of wanted to emphasise that is because I know in paragraph 7, it refers to wanting to try and do as much as possible for young people in Trafford, and certainly in the 2 wards I've spoken about, Buccleuch, St Martin's and Clifford, again, they're the 2 wards that compete with one another in terms of having the highest proportion of children that are growing up in child poverty. So really, I just wanted to emphasise that. The other thing I just wanted
to just say something on that, because we are, obviously this is a new process to us, so we're seeking feedback all the time on the application process. We have this year made a huge change to our large grants form based on feedback. But also we've trained up some community mentors to be out in the community to help people navigate the application process, and also with the capacity builders, that's part of their job as well. But if you have got some more specific feedback, you know, outside of this meeting around how you think we could improve the application process. Another thing we've just done is introduce a video application around the smaller amounts, so micro. So we're trialing that at the small level to say that if people don't want to put lots of words on a piece of paper, they can just send us a video. So yeah, we're open to feedback on that.
And then sort of building on that, I didn't know if this might not be something that you're able to answer, but Trafford's got its own sort of communities and partnerships team. And I didn't know if you sort of had an assessment as to whether or not what the working relationship is like between our staff who are responsible for communities and partnerships and community development, and then staff at THT who are sort of responsible for the social investment fund, whether you think it's working well or whether there's things that can be done differently to, you know, mutual benefit essentially.
So I've spent a lot of time working with Adrian on that, and as the team, we did have 3 capacity builders and now we've got 4. So we've been able to match our patches geographically to match Trafford Council's partnerships team. So we have sort of buddied up professionally, and I know the teams have spent a lot of time together to build that working relationship and make sure that the information, you know, that both ways we're sharing information about the work that we're doing, and making sure that we're getting relevant referrals. Another thing we've done, because there's the grants pot that the communities and partnerships team have from Trafford Council. So we did some work looking at how the 2 funds can complement each other, so that groups aren't just maybe go into one pot and getting declined and then go into another pot, and they're very clear around which pot would be most appropriate for them. So yeah, I'd say we've got a good working relationship.
Well, and then the last thing I wanted to say is, again, just an observation really. I really welcome the reference in paragraph 12.1, I think it is, referring to the poverty strategy and the work that Trafford's trying to do to develop a corporate poverty strategy. And Chair, I was just wondering if at some point we might be able to focus as a committee on the work that's being done, because I think, you know, it's something that we could be really ambitious about, and registered providers need to play a really important role in that. So that again, that's just an observation, but thank you very much for answering the questions.
What he just said, to be honest, all of the things that Aidan just said were the questions I was going to ask. It's about, yeah, apart from perhaps one specific question in that, but it's all about rebalancing the geographies. And I have seen the forms for the grant forms, and they are hideously complicated. You're saying they're now being made simpler. And the one thing which jumps out in your answer to Aidan's question is you're going to have community mentors who will help people through that process.
We already have community mentors.
Okay,
Yeah.
so how do the community contact them?
If people contact, on our website and through all our interactions, we say if you need help developing your project, then we will make someone available, whether that's a staff member or a mentor. The role of the mentors is also sort of an ambassadorial role. So we're encouraging them, they're people who are well connected in the community, and we encourage them to go out and talk to people about the opportunity to apply and sort of generate those applications.
And they would help them through the application process itself?
Yeah.
Okay, good to know, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. It's two questions. I was interested in how you set your priority themes, strengthening families and communities, employment and skills, boosting household incomes, and long-term economic growth. Those are your themes and your priorities. So I was wondering how you set those. And also, we've just been learning about how the demographics in Trafford has changed, and we have a lot of pressures now because of older people and the extra spend on the changing demographics. So I just wondered how you review your priorities in light of changing demographics like that.
Yep. So originally the priorities were set. We looked at national research around how we could have the biggest impact on poverty and inequality, and those priorities came through the Joseph Rowntree research on we can solve poverty, UK poverty by 2030. So that was a strategy that we took. They're broad, and under each of those priorities, we wanted to match that national research with very local data. So under each of those priorities, we've looked at what does Trafford need? So what are the specific needs within Trafford? With all the applications, we are also asking what is the local need and what is the evidence that you've got. So that's where applicants are bringing in the demographic information, the indices of deprivation, and talking at a very local level, if their project is local or if it's across Trafford, around how they can meet the need that they're seeing. We are reviewing the priorities. We wanted to keep it broad as we first set about, because we wanted to see what the demand was and what the appetite was, and we didn't want to restrict priorities and turn people away. So we wanted to keep it quite open. Now we're in a position where we're 2 years in. We are looking at what has the biggest impact, and perhaps having a tighter focus, so that then we can report more rigorously about the impact. Because if you have broad priorities, it's hard to measure the impact across the board.
Can I just ask about
Yeah. So they're probably profit for purpose. Actually, I'd have to confirm. But they're a housing association like ourselves. They have a northwest. Sorry, not a northwest. They have a academy and a foundation, which is how they invest in communities. But they're also developing and building properties. So like ourselves, they're investing to generate profits to invest in communities as well. But they're a housing provider.
In terms of, obviously, it must be very large.
Yes.
Sometimes you wonder whether you get lost within it, you get subsumed into it. And I don't know what the safeguards are.
So we've got a 5-year integration period. So we're keeping our autonomy and our name for the next 5 years whilst we integrate. I think the difference that yes, obviously the scale of the organisation is tenfold from us, and we also want to develop what we're doing across the northwest. So Trafford Housing Trust, as it was, is going to also be scaling up. But I think the difference in geography means that we will keep our own personality and our own identity throughout that process.
You do feel sometimes that that distance becomes larger and larger as years go by, and they're being taken over by something probably you could suspect that you could get a lot lower, and that would be very, very aggressive.
Yeah, I think the scale of the housing crisis needs a very ambitious and dynamic response, which is the aim of the acquisition.
I just wanted to add to that, when the L&Q acquisition was first announced, Aquila, Councillor Akinola, and I went to see Larry Gold, thank you, Chief Exec, to talk about exactly those points. And he was very down the line that nothing would change in the foreseeable future. Because one thing I was very concerned about is we've seen the examples of companies whose centre of gravity is not in the northwest, and suddenly those services start to move south. And I would be very concerned if, say, the contractors who are doing the work on the housing stock start to come out of Birmingham or London instead of the northwest. Larry assured me that was not going to be the case. I hope that turns out to be true in 5 years' time. I wasn't looking for you to give a personal assurance.
I can't comment or give assurance on that.
But yeah, I just think generally it's just a concern, and the scale of L&Q is it got a housing stock worth 30 billion compared to the 1 billion of Trafford Housing. The scale is just immense, absolutely immense. One hopes they don't swallow Trafford Housing up.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
Oh, switch on. Yeah, so the report is there on that meeting. They assured us that the work has started and will finish, or should finish, by April, which I think will be a relief for the residents. One of the things that I raised, and it has been raised with the fire service as well, and we did have a fire officer that came to our last meeting to give a presentation around sprinklers. And I think one of the recommendations that we've got in the report is to write formally on behalf of the committee, expressing that the committee would like to, for them to consider implementing sprinklers in their buildings in Trafford. So I think if everybody's agreed with the recommendations, then we should do that. Yeah, Aidan.
I was just going to reflect, and I didn't get to attend the meeting with THT. I think it was in working hours, but I think recommendation 2, is it? Where am I? That we note the reasons given by THT for the delay in replacing the cladding. I don't really think that the report touched on the reasons given by THT. They're not, well, when I read through the report, it wasn't particularly obvious to me what their explanation was for sort of the length of time it's taken to start doing the work. I mean, I agree with the other 3 recommendations, absolutely, but I just think, given that we were asking them to sort of provide a narrative for why it's taken quite so long, I didn't really feel like that narrative came through in the report, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that was a question that was put to them, and I put that. And one of the reasons for the delays, and it says it in 2.4, they've hired lawyers for structural engineer lawyers to ensure that they found a safe and effective replacement for cladding. And also the availability of the experts along with the required materials had led to an unavoidable delay. So when you consider that up and down the country, and this is what they enlarged on, there are not all the experts that you would like to immediately get. So and similarly with materials as well. And so that inevitably led to some delays. I think also there was conflicting views from government in the first instances around, the testing of inflammable cladding or non-inflammable cladding, and that led to delays and delays of information as well. Having said all that, I still believe that it is a long time to have to wait, but measures, as it says in the report, safety measures were implemented straight away after Grenfell to negate some of the problems, like what do they call it? Watches. Yeah, 24-hour watch. So clearly, it is a national issue as well. It's a national problem that I think we all recognise. And up and down the country, a lot of councils and other agencies are struggling with this. But I think the reassurance that I got was that the work has started and it will and should be completed by April. And I think that that is in the recommendation that we have an update on that. But the sprinklers is a separate issue, which they are considering very seriously, and there is a report that will be presented to their board. It was delayed, but will be presented in January, and I think it would be timely for us to put something forward in support of sprinklers, because what the fire service say locally and nationally, and have been saying for many, many years, that sprinklers save lives. And I think if you're in a tower block and you've got the security of sprinklers, then that is a reassurance to you. And I think from what the fire service has said, and what from my knowledge of the fire service as well, that sprinklers aren't the same now as what they were 20 years ago, and where it would probably flood the rooms and the houses and the buildings. It is a fine film of spray that instantly puts out and depresses the flames, and I think most buildings that have them are very safe buildings. So, yeah.
Raise one question. If we go back to the immediate days after Grenfell, some of us attended a meeting at the Trafford Park fire station, and I picked up a feeling then that the feeling about sprinklers was, for want of a better word, ambivalent, and that there's no question at all that they worked. Now, burned into my memory is the line which says, "Nobody dies in a fire in an office block because they have sprinklers and because people are awake. People die in places like Grenfell because they weren't awake." But there was a concern that the installation of sprinklers would damage the structure of the building, the containment that should have worked in Grenfell and didn't. And I wondered if that came up during the conversations you had
No,
with the fire
absolutely not,
brigade.
John. No. Obviously, the previous chair of the fire authority, I know quite
Well,
a lot
exactly.
about. I
I'm
know
looking
quite a
for
lot
it.
about
No
sprinklers, both nationally and locally, and it's absolutely supported by the fire service across the country. I think every service across the country supports it. The trade unions support it as well, the FBU. And they have been recommended from previous enquiries where they've had tower previous fires, but it's not been implemented, and it's not directly recommended by the government. They're not saying they're against it, but they are ambivalent. And my own view, from what I've been told on numerous occasions from across the country, that sprinklers keep people safe in these high-rise buildings, and they would recommend it every time. There is a cost to it, but there's a human cost if you don't do it as well. And I would personally feel a lot safer in a hotel or a high-rise block of flats if there was sprinklers in there. Yeah.
I just wanted to add to that because I came into the presentation given by, I've been to two, both, one given by fire officers and one given by the Fire Brigade Union, and they're absolutely unambivalent about the fact that sprinklers work, and their absolute frustration is that the legislation has not been passed within England to get those passed. I think it was passed by the Welsh Parliament. I think it's been passed by the Scottish Parliament within weeks of Grenfell to make it compulsory in above 6 stories, I think was the there's a above a certain amount of storage make it compulsory. In England, the government refuses to do it for reasons of cost. Is why it's not done, because developers do not like it, because it adds about 120 quid. It was I think it might have been £1,500 per floor or £1,500 per flat. In the scheme of a development, it is, excuse the pun, I don't wish to be flippant, it's a drop in the ocean. It absolutely is, but the legislation is not being passed. And it was just to add to what you were saying. It works. All the experts say it works. It should be legislated for. Absolutely should.
Clearly, there's also the inquiry that is continuing to go on, and there's a Hackett report which stops short of saying precisely how legislation should be provided in terms of the safety of buildings, and I think the regulations that are provided at the moment are unclear in my view, and I think there needs to be absolute clarity on what those regulations. I mean, I don't know how you would get through in terms of regulations of putting cladding up that actually went through the building like it did.
Well, that's the second part of the inquiry, isn't it?
It is the second part of the inquiry. Absolutely. So we'll wait and see what that says in the future, I think. Yes, Aidan.
Thanks, Chair. I do take on board everything that you've said, and the detail that you've gone into regarding the discussions that you held with THT. Personally, I still maintain really that I think Trafford Housing Trust could have moved a bit quicker in line with what other registered providers were doing in Greater Manchester. I think where the report doesn't quite go into as much detail as I liked is that there isn't a justification for why the cladding had to sit on the buildings for so long. I acknowledge that clearly there was a lot of background work being done, but that work, it seems to me, could have started toward removing the cladding. Though I acknowledge that you've provided assurances and THT have provided assurances that interim measures were put in place to enhance fire safety. I acknowledge now we are where we are and that the work's begun. What I would say is I think the report acknowledges that they're not entirely sure of the timescales themselves. It says that there's the capacity to overrun by 6 to 10 weeks. So if we can keep this as a sort of standing item for the time being on the agenda for Scrutiny Committee, I'd welcome that. Thanks anyway, Jack.
I agree with you, Aidan, yeah. So we can agree the recommendations. We'll get a letter off, and we'll also be monitoring the progress. And I think we need to be kept updated, and we can report back. All right. Thanks very much for that. So item 9 is the final item, isn't it? It's just a work programme. And if you look at the back of the work programme, page 64, you'll see the ongoing task and finish groups. The affordable housing in Trafford, which Aidan chairs. So that's still ongoing. Climate emergency, well, we completed our report on that, and a presentation went to the executive in September, and we'll be awaiting the executive response, and that will be delivered to the full council. The high-rise cladding we've just talked about, and the One Trafford partnership. We did that piece of work on Amy, and we made 3 potential recommendations, options as recommendations, and I attended a recent executive meeting that had a report in the closed section on the work that's continuing with Amy, and once that work is completed, the executive will bring forward a proposal to show the way forward, and that's expected in the new year. So it's just to update you on that. Oh yes, I did. Yes, I missed it when I read it actually, because it was at the bottom of the page, wasn't it? I've just lost it now. Yeah. Yeah. So Barry is chairing on that. Do you want to say a few words about it?
Yeah, we had the first scoping meeting. We've identified 3 main areas we're going to be looking at: internal planning, building regulation, and the wider built environment. We've had our first consultation session with various disability groups around Manchester, and that was extremely well received. They were thrilled at the fact that Trafford Council was taking a real interest in this. We've done some work on the legislation with Jane Lefebvre, the kind of legislation we can use to improve access. We've met with Manchester Disabled People's Access Group to get their input on this, and we've worked with the council's staff disability group. So we're on track to what we said we were going to do to produce a report by the end of this financial year. There's an awful lot of information to absorb, and certainly from my perspective, what I'd like to be able to do is to produce both a short-term recommendation, something we can achieve very, very quickly, and also a longer-term plan based on what the local authorities have done. Manchester's the shining light for what's done in this. That's me finished.